Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Hope you're doing well. And it's time for another edition of our tier list series. Haven't done one of these in a while, but I did promise that I would do another one of these after I came out with my review of the latest Tool record. Some of these, given my previous opinions and statements, should be no surprise to any of you, but still, I thought it would be interesting to do this and basically show that I generally think very highly of Tool's back catalog. So, let us begin. All right, let's kick it off, I think, with Tool's first record, and then we're going to go from there. We're just going to do studio albums. So first off, we have the band's record Undertow. Very solid alternative metal record, a little progressive, but I see this as a band in formation. There are a lot of great songs on this thing. Sober is an amazing track. Prison Sex is an amazing track. I mean, generally every song on this record is very good. Not a dud in the bunch, in my opinion. I still do see this as a formative record for Tool, though, because at this point, a lot of those psychedelic and mystical elements haven't really come into the fold yet. The polyrhythmic and more, I guess, mathematical elements of the band hadn't completely formed yet. But still, having said all that, this is a great record. This is a really great alternative metal album. Even with this not being the band at their best and the band not having fully formed their trademark sound completely, this is still an amazingly solid album that has held up over years and years and years and years. The production is a little grimy, but the performances are visceral, so it kind of makes up for that because the playing is so explosive and aggressive at times. The way the band builds up to those climaxes is great. Maynard's singing is fantastic. The guitar riffs and bass lines are creative, certainly for the genre, certainly for the time, certainly stand out today as well. Tool has been one of the few bands in that alt metal scene, also favored by the new metal scene that was burgeoning at the time, that is aged like a fine fucking wine. And it's albums like Undertow that still sound fantastic to this day. Does this record go as far as some other classic albums in the Tool discography? In my opinion, no. But it's still a very solid listen. It's still a good listen. In fact, I would say a great listen. I don't want to underrate it or anything. I would put this as a solid A. This is an A record for me. This is an A record. Okay, just to sort of show you. I own this record. I love this record. I think it's fantastic. And frankly, I think Tool gets even better from here. So to cover the next record, Anemo, which dropped a handful of years later and is, in my opinion, one of Tool's best. And while it's not as vast and expansive and as layered or as lush as a record like Lateralis, for example, I think that Tool definitely hit a really fantastic and amazing balance of more psychedelic, more mystical elements to their writing, to the weird time signatures they'd work into their stuff, the hypnotic guitar lines, all of those qualities coming together into tracks that were pretty much as straightforward, as hard-hitting, as instantaneously memorable as tracks from Undertow. In that respect, it is an improvement. There's some creative interludes and stuff on the record that are very odd and funny. Maynard's lyricism grew a lot more interesting on this project, in my opinion. I don't think it's as progressive. I don't think it's the band's most progressive moment in their discography, but I think it's the band's catchiest record. I think it's the band's most gratifying, fun to listen to. Again, instantaneously, like, bam, it's in your mind type of album. This album's like the scalpel of Tool's discography. It cuts right to the chase while still maintaining those weird, mystical, spacey, progressive elements. I think Tool is one of the few bands that has so successfully been able to, in the way that they did on this record, show genuine virtuosity and I guess a real sense of adventure and expansiveness in their brand of rock music, while still writing and performing and delivering songs that, again, hit hard and really just like got to the point. And you know, that's whether you're talking about tracks like Stinkfist, that's whether you're talking about tracks like 46 and 2. That's whether you're talking about tracks like Hooker with a Penis. This is an S tier for me. This is an S tier. This is there's no fucking with this record. Okay, there's no fucking with this record. All right, the next one that Tool dropped in their discography is their 2001 album Lateralis. And so where does Tool go from here? Where does Tool go from here to Anemo? It's certainly not down. To me, this record is fantastic as well. I would also rate this record as an S. You know, these two records are pretty much the crown jewels of Tool's discography, in my opinion. And I love both, and I think both are amazing records for slightly different reasons. While there are really good singles on this project, there are standout tracks that are instantaneously catchy, whether you're talking about the bass line on Schism, whether you're talking about a lot of Maynard's vocal lines on the title track, whether you're talking about the hard-hitting and thunderous guitar riffs on the opener, The Grudge. Yeah, there are a lot of sticky and straightforward elements all over this record, but. The songwriting became a lot more expansive on this one. The rhythms became a lot more interesting. The time signature factor was really, and the mathematical factor was really getting turned up on this record. A lot of the psychedelic elements were being leaned on a little bit harder. I would say by comparison, this album is a lot more hypnotic than Tool's previous record. And again, I enjoy that quality about it. I also love how certain tracks sort of segue into each other and complement one another as far as the flow of the album goes. So there's certainly an incredible amount of attention being paid to that, certainly more attention than I think was being paid to that characteristic on Tool's last couple of records. So I love how this record flows. I love how all of the songs come together. It's quite cinematic in that way. I love how tracks like Parable and Parabola come together. I love how tracks like Disposition and Reflection come together. This record is really amazing. It's really big picture. Again, I'll say hypnotic. I'll say cerebral. I think it's Tool's most cerebral project, successfully cerebral. I think that to a degree, Fear Inoculum was trying to be even more cerebral, but I think that that this record is the band's most cerebral in terms of successfully achieving that and being an amazingly entertaining project from front to back. Don't really have anything negative to say about this one, frankly. I love it. Again, I think it's just as great as their past one. I think both records are equally amazing for slightly different reasons, and I will leave it at that. All right, moving on to the next one, what was Tool's last album for a while, 10,000 Days. And this one, I have elements of it that I love. I have elements that I not so much love. It's not a terrible record. I would solidly put it in the band's discography at the B tier. It's not bad by any means. I just think there are some aspects of this record that I would have wanted more from, and I think that there are elements of this album that listening to it more in retrospect do signal to me, yeah, okay, I could understand why the band wouldn't want to drop another record past this one for a few different reasons. One, the band doesn't really break too much in terms of new ground on this record. Sure, there's a bit more attention paid to how some songs segue into one another and build on one another, especially in the case of the tribute tracks to Maynard's mother, which are pretty, amazing. Easily some of the best music Tool has composed across their entire discography. But there are some other tracks on here that I think attempt to be as hypnotic or as expansive, but are a little underwhelming. The band, again, fails to try anything all that new on this project, and when they do, I think that they fall flat on their face a little bit, whether you're talking about the very chunky guitar riffs and tones on the track Zombie, which sound a little out of place and maybe more fitting for a more commercial and aggressive band in the alternative metal or nu metal field that would have still been kind of chugging along around this point. We also have some a very so-so closer on this record, in my opinion, and also the drums on the track Intention. the skittering electronic elements of the drums, just how they really are intrusive to the point where I think they ruin the very mystical and, again, hypnotic vibe of the track. There are some elements of this record that stand out as not being up to snuff when it comes to the rest of Tool's discography. Though I could still say Vicarious, for example, even though that track sounds like a song Tool could have put on an album ago or something, the performance is still great. The production is still amazing. And this album, in comparison with Lateralis, there are elements of it that feel a bit heavier. You know, and for some fans, that could be a great thing. There are just some stale ideas on here, some new ideas that I don't think go over too well, though I can see also how this project points to a Fear inoculum. Some of the jammier elements, some of the rhythmic elements, especially on Right Into, certainly direct toward what the band was trying to do on Fear inoculum. And I think that should bring us basically to Tool's latest record here. And where I would place this, honestly, is in the D tier. I don't care for it too much. I think that the production is not nearly as good as it was on Tool's other records. I think that the more meditative direction that the songwriting was taking on this project didn't really benefit the songs, as the songwriting, in my opinion, was really weak, and the jams weren't really as interesting as I think the band assumed them to be. A lot of the guitar lines, solos, passages on this thing ranged from being incredibly stereotypical for Tool to just being ham-fisted or just not really complimenting everything else that's going on. There were interludes and synth passages that to me didn't really mean all that much or communicate all that much. And probably the least amount of attention paid across Tool's entire discography when it comes to how all of the tracks complement each other as an entire record, how they flow into each other. The record is really just a mess. I mean, depending on, you know, the range that we're working with here, again, I would place it in D, maybe even place it in E on a bad day or something, but it's really kind of around this range. Maybe I'll have a better sense of where exactly I would place it if I had another record that I thought was just so-so, or a record from Tool that I thought was maybe more of a solidly C album. But either way, again, I think the vast majority of what Tool's put out over the years is very much high-tier stuff, very much unique, very much enjoyable, and you know, some of the best alternative rock and metal that has been offered over the past few decades. For a lot of bands that make comebacks and continue to come out with music, the record that they return with is not really their best. You know, it's a bit of a trope at this point. And then after that, you know, there could be an album that is a lot more gratifying in comparison. I'm hoping that's essentially the trajectory we're working on here. So that's essentially my Tool tier list over here. This is where I would rank the records. These are how I feel about all these Tool albums. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Tool, Fear inoculum, forever.